Jonah is what they would call like an anti-hero. He's commissioned by God. He has an assignment. And yet Jonah, from the very beginning of the book, is disobedient to God. So if you would this morning, turn with me to the book of Jonah, chapter 1. And I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. We're going to skip around a little bit. And I'm reading out of the New King James Version. Jonah kind of appears in the middle of the Bible. He's what they would call a minor prophet. He comes after the book of Obadiah. There's like 3 little books, and then Jonah's right there. If you blink, you'll miss it. But Jonah chapter 1, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. And the word of the Lord says this. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. Jonah is assigned a great task. The city of Nineveh has been doing a lot of bad things. One of the things I love about the Bible is that you know it's accurate because you can always fact check it against history. And so if you look historically at Nineveh, Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians were known for their violence and brutality. They weren't just cruel, they were barbaric. And God tells Jonah, I've seen their wickedness. And I want you to go to the city of Nineveh, and I want you to tell them that if they don't turn from their ways, judgment is coming for them. Now, Nineveh was a part of the Assyrian Empire. They were not a part of Israel. They would be what you would call Gentiles. They were outside of Israel. And so God has given Jonah the assignment, like the Apostle Paul, you are not going to your own people, you are going to a foreign land. And Jonah's response is this. But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. God said, go to Nineveh, which was this way. And Jonah said, I'm going to go this way. Notice there was no back and forth. When God told Moses to go before Pharaoh, Moses at least stood his ground and said, Lord, I don't want to go. I have these things working out not in my favor. I'm not a good speaker. What if they don't listen to me? What if, and God would combat Moses, but Moses and God had a dialect together. There have been times in which God would give people assignments and they would talk back to God. They would express their doubts and their fears before the Lord, and God would comfort them and he would come back with them. But in Jonah's case, rather than speaking to God, he basically gets up, packs a suitcase and said, I heard you. You told me to go to Nineveh. All right. 1 ticket to Tarshish, please. And he goes the opposite direction and he gets into a ship. And not only does he get into this ship, but he then has the audacity to go to sleep. God gave Jonah a calling. He gave him an assignment. And one thing we have to understand, church, is this. Sometimes God is going to give us an assignment that maybe we don't necessarily want to do. But we were given the task to do it anyway. No assignment is too big or too small when God is concerned. If it's too big, God will give you the strength to do it. And if it seems too small, just assume that God's only giving you a bite-sized version of it, because if he showed you the whole thing, you couldn't handle it. It says in the Bible that that is faithful in the small things will become ruler over many. Some of us never get to become a ruler over many because we are not good at doing the small things. Church works out the way that it does, and God designed it this way because we are all meant to work together because we all have a job to do. I may be the pastor of the church, but it's not my job to do everything in the church. I can't. There's only one of me. But God did give me congregants and people that can also fill in gaps, and that's what God called us to do. I remember I was a Sunday school superintendent at a church. And at one of the board meetings that we had, we were talking about church growth. And so I brought up the fact, I said, we need structure and we need leadership and organization in the church. And they said, what does that look like? I said, well, when people walk in, for one, there's no one greeting them. We got to have people greeting them at the door. What if someone brand new off the street, never been to church before, comes in here? Where do they sit? Where do they go? Who do they talk to? How do they pay their tithes? No, someone needs to be there to greet them and to explain the process if they don't already know. We agree with that. What else? We need someone to work the nursery. We have people in here that have babies. We need someone to come and love on the babies. We agree with that. What else? Okay, well, we have youth ministry. We're doing good with that. What about kids? What are we going to do with our children? Okay, great. What else? And so I said all these things, and people agreed, and they loved the ideas. And I said, great. Who wants to be greeters? And I looked out there, and no one raised their hand. I said, what about you? And the responses I got were things like this. Well, God has called me to a pulpit ministry. I can't be at the door. Well, I hate to break it to you, but if you can't stand at the door and greet, then you can't be up here. Jesus himself said, I did not come to be served, but to serve others and give my life as a ransom. One of the last things he did before he went to the cross was he took a towel, wrapped it around his waist, got a basin of water, and he washed his disciples' feet, including Judas, who he knew would betray him. A lot of people want to come and they want this and they'll say, I'll teach and I'll do this, but I'm not willing to put the towel around my waist. Who's going to watch the babies? Who's going to welcome them? Who's going to greet them? No assignment in the church is too small. And some of you may say, I don't want to be in the pulpit, and God's called you there. And you're like, I don't want to do that. No assignment's too great. God will actually make a way for you to end up where you need to be at. But what's important is that we answer the call. Now, there are some things that you need to understand about Jonah in these first 3 verses. I'm going to give you some history and some background about this character named Jonah. This is not the first time Jonah is called to prophesy. If you go to the book of 2 Kings, he goes to King Jeroboam II, who was a very, very wicked king in the land of Israel, and tells him good news. Even though you're wicked and you're doing the wrong thing, God has heard the cries of your people, and he's going to deliver your enemy into your hands. Go out and you will get victory. He had a positive word for a wicked king. Jonah loved his people. He loved Israel. And he was under the impression that the gospel was just for people that looked like him, talked like him, walked like him, but it wasn't for everybody else. The term that you could use for someone like Jonah would be this. He was a nationalist. He was Israel and Israel only. And God called him to go to the Gentiles. And so it created a bit of confusion inside of Jonah. The other thing that was wrong with Jonah is Jonah had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. This is not the first place that we see Jonah mentioned. In fact, 2 Kings isn't the first place that we see Jonah mentioned. He's mentioned in another book of the Bible, but he is unnamed. But based on Jewish traditions and Jewish scholars, they've pinpointed who he was. We are familiar with a man by the name of Elijah. Elijah did great things. One of the things that he did was he rained fire down from heaven. He was a great prophet of the Lord. On one of his expeditions and on one of his prophetic ventures, he ends up in a place called Zarephath. And there in Zarephath, Elijah meets a widow. And when he meets this woman, he goes up to her and he says, "Can you give me something to drink?" And she said, "Sure." And then he said, "Can you make me a little cake?" And she said, "Well, here's the thing, sir. I only have enough flour and oil to make one cake. And I was going to make a cake for me and my son, and then we were going to go and die." And Elijah said, "I hear you. Make me a cake first, and then make yourself a cake." So she was obedient and she made Elijah a cake and he ate. And then she went back to her flour and oil and it had replenished itself. And even though there was a famine in the land, her oil and her flour never ran out. And so she allowed Elijah to stay in her home during this famine. And while he was staying with her, something happened. This woman's son passed away. And so Elijah goes and he lays across this young man 3 times. And after he does that, the boy comes back to life. That boy was Jonah. He was a young man that had died and was brought back to life by the prophet Elijah. Elijah lived in his home. Elijah was there and he ate meals with him. And so when it came time for Elijah to choose his successor, he picks a man by the name of Elisha. You lived in my house. You ate my mother's cakes. You raised me from the dead, and you choose Elisha. Jonah was a bit upset and a bit bitter because, according to the tradition, he felt like he should have been the next great prophet. And instead, God calls him to Nineveh. See, God knows our hearts. And he knows our deepest thoughts and our inner workings. Why would God call you to be a prophet, a great prophet to the nation, when you miss out on an opportunity to go to the least of these? There are people in your neighborhood, people on your job, people that are surrounding you, people in your family that need to hear that God loves them. They need to hear your story and your testimony. Sometimes God doesn't call you to sit on a pew, but God calls you to get active and to go into the world and make a difference. And if we cannot talk to people who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, then we miss an opportunity. Anybody here grow up super duper Pentecostal? Y'all know what I'm talking about. You don't go to the bowling alley. There are sinners there and people are drinking alcohol. You don't want to do that. You can't go bowling. You can't go to the movies. You can't go swimming. All of these things that we cannot do, but who needs the gospel? The person at the bowling alley drinking needs to hear that there's a God that loves them. And the rules said, don't go where sinners were. And Jesus said, I didn't come for the well. I came for those who need a physician. Jesus went out to the places where nobody wanted to go. He touched people that nobody wanted to touch. And he said, I love you and I've come for you. Nobody touched the lepers, but Jesus hugged on them. People dismissed the women, and yet Jesus used them to preach the gospel. The Pharisees and the tax collectors, they referred to them as the most disreputable sinners, and Jesus said, let me come and have a meal with you. Let's sit down and talk together. If you only want to go to people that you feel comfortable with, you miss the point of this book. God called us to go into the world. And so Jonah hears the assignment from God and says, Nineveh's this way. I'm heading this way. And he thought for a second that he could run away from God. But if you go to Jonah chapter 1 and verse 12, it says this. And he said to them, pick me up and throw me into the sea, then the sea will become calm for you. In verse 15, for I know that this great tempest is because of me. So they picked up Jonah, threw him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly and offered a sacrifice to the Lord and took vows. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So Jonah hitches a ride with these people who are on their way to Tarshish. He gets in the boat, he goes into the bottom, and he decides he's going to go to sleep. And a great storm arose. The sailors are fearing for their lives. The storm is raging. The ship is about to go under. Everyone is panicking, and Jonah is sleeping. You ever have a time in your life where trouble just seems to find you and you just want it to go away? And so the solution you came up with to make it go away faster is, if I just go to sleep, maybe it'll be better tomorrow. Is that anybody else in here have that happen? I'm just going to go to sleep. And if I sleep, maybe when I wake up, it'll all be over with. And so Jonah's thinking, if I just go down here and I sleep, no matter what happens, when I wake up, I'll be in Tarshish, far away from the problem. And if I'm nowhere near Nineveh, then God has to find somebody else. And as he's sleeping in this boat, the sailors come down. How are you sleeping when we're about to die? We've thrown our cargo overboard. These men, this was their livelihood. We had cargo, we had things we were shipping, and we've thrown everything overboard thinking that if we were lighter, we could make it through this storm, but nothing is working. Because of what Jonah did, these men are now suffering. How many of you people have suffered because you didn't answer the call that God put on your life? You went and acted in disobedience, and because of your disobedience, because of the rebellion, because of your stubbornness, because of your fear, because of your own inadequacies and that voice inside of your head telling you you can't, you won't, you're not qualified, you're not good enough. What if all of these things happen? People have suffered because you missed what God was calling you to do. There's a time in my life, and I will never forget this. Not because God didn't forgive me, and not because, it's not under the blood. It's because it was a reminder to me of what happens when we don't answer the call that God has on our life. This was a time in our life, you heard me talk about it before. Me and Danielle, we were newly married. We were young. We were broke. Typical newlywed things. We had a kid. And so one of the things I would do to get money is I would donate plasma. And I would do this pretty regularly. I was a regular. They knew me. I knew them. I got points. I knew when the specials were and all this other stuff. I had donating plasma down to a science, okay? And so I go to the plasma bank, which is in downtown Columbus, Ohio, on High Street. If you're unfamiliar with that, it is not a good area, especially off of 17th Avenue. Super sketchy. And the people that donate plasma, well, they're there for a reason, not just because they needed to buy diapers like me. And so I'm sitting there, I'm donating plasma, and God said, when you get up to leave, ask if anybody in this room needs prayer. And I said, God, I'm hearing you incorrectly. I am not standing up and doing that. And while I'm in that chair donating, me and God are having this conversation back and forth. God said, stand up and ask somebody if they need prayer. And I said, God, I must be hearing you incorrect. This must be me thinking that I'm something, so much of something. I'm looking for an opportunity to preach. This is just insanity. I'm not going to do that. How crazy is this? Lord, I can't be me. You must be talking to somebody else, not me. And so rather than my plasma experience being like, I read a book, I watched a video on my phone, this was filled with anxiety because me and God are going back and forth because I don't want to do what he's telling me to do. Was I a pastor at the time? Nope. I was just a person in the pews. But I felt God speaking to me. And so I got up from donating plasma, and God said, before you leave, ask if anybody needs prayer. And I turned and I looked at everybody that was there. And I could see hurting people and I could see broken people. And I ran out the door. I was scared. And I remember that to this day because the question I ask myself, what would have happened if I would have just asked the question? I was more concerned about being embarrassed. I was more concerned about what people thought about me. I was more concerned about the workers asking me to leave. What revival could have taken place in downtown Columbus had I just stood up and said, Lord, I'm willing to do whatever you ask me to do. Even if it's scary, even if I'm embarrassed, even if it's uncomfortable. What if? Instead, I pulled a Jonah and I ran and got in my car and I drove away, but the feeling of guilt didn't go away. The feeling of what if didn't go away. The question of who needed God in that moment, and I walked away and let them die. Weighed on me. Who needed to hear the gospel that day? Who needed delivered that day? Who was on the verge of suicide? And God said, I need you to pray for them. And I looked at them in the eyes and I walked away because fear gripped me. And I was more concerned about what they thought than about what God was willing to do. Now I can't make that mistake again because I know the cost of walking away from God. So Jonah goes in the opposite direction and the storm comes and these men are about to die. They've thrown their cargo overboard and now they're like, what do we do? They said the only thing we can do is pray to our gods. So they're praying to their pagan gods and they go down and they find Jonah sleeping. Get up and pray to your God because someone has made the gods mad. And so then what they do is they basically draw straws to see who gets the short straw. Whoever got the short straw is the person who made the gods mad. And so as they're drawing straws, guess who gets the short straw? It's Jonah. And they all look at him and they say, what did you do? And Jonah said, well, here's the thing, guys. I'm supposed to be in Nineveh right now. And they're like, well, this is the opposite direction. He's like, I know, I'm well aware. I don't want to go to Nineveh right now. So I hid on your boat. And they're like, well, how do we make this stop? And he's like, well, you're going to have to throw me into the water. And they were like, we're not doing that because if we do, you'll die. And Jonah's probably like, here. So funny thing about that, I've already died once. We're good. Throw me overboard. And so they pray and they say, God, we're going to throw him overboard, but please don't let this man's blood be in our hands. Please do not let us get in trouble for this. And they toss Jonah overboard into the sea. And as soon as Jonah hits the water, guess what happens? The storm ceases. For 3 days and nights, he's in the belly of a whale. Chapter 2, Jonah is praying. It is Jonah's prayer to God. Lord, you've delivered me from death. And in this prayer, he mentions dying several times. And if you're reading this just from Jonah's perspective, you're going, he must have died when he was eaten by that fish. Possibly. But based on Jewish traditions, he already died once before. And so God showed him mercy once by resurrecting him. He's swallowed by a fish. What kind of fish was it? We don't know. Bible doesn't say. We know it was a great fish, and he's swallowed by it. And for 3 days and nights, he's in the belly of a fish. Could he have survived there? Possibly. Did he die there? We don't know. But what we do know is this. 3 days later, the fish spits him out. And guess where he's at? Nineveh. Jesus makes a reference to this when the Pharisees show up and they say, if you're really the Son of God, give us a sign. We need a sign. Give us a sign that you are the Son of God. And Jesus said, I'm going to give you the sign of Jonah. 3 days and nights, Jonah was in the belly of a whale. 3 days and nights, I will be buried, but I will rise again. And there's a comparison between the two of them. Jonah dies and he comes back. And he's willing to see. He's willing to go to where God called him to, but he's reluctant. Jonah dies, comes back. and he doesn't have a love for people. He runs because he doesn't want to go to people he doesn't like. Jesus shows up to the scene and he does everything he can to serve the people that no one likes. Jonah wants to save his life, but Jesus comes to lose his. Jesus is in a boat sleeping and a storm arises. Jonah is in a boat sleeping and a storm arises. Jesus calms the storm. Jonah causes the storm. So Jonah shows up at Nineveh. And when he shows up at Nineveh, he warns them, God is going to destroy you in 40 days. And here's what happens, Jonah 3:5-9. So the people of Nineveh believed God, proclaimed a fast, and put on sackcloth from the greatest to the least of them. Then word came to the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne and laid aside his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he caused it to be proclaimed and published throughout Nineveh by the decree of the king and his nobles, saying, let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock taste anything. Do not let them eat or drink water, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth and cry mightily to God. Yes, let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hands. Who can tell if God will turn and relent and turn away from his fierce anger so that we may not perish? He preaches to them, and they turn and they repent. God showed mercy on those who did not deserve mercy. Mercy means you don't get what you deserve. Grace means you get what you don't deserve. I thank God for mercy because I know that I deserved hell for the things that I have done. I know that I should not have been spared. There have been times in which my life was physically in danger and I should have died, but yet God saw fit to save someone like me. He showed mercy on me. He did not give me what I deserved. And if you're sitting here, you are a participant or recipient of God's mercy. God gave you what you didn't deserve. He saved you. He picked you up. He turned you around. He loved you when you were unlovable. He called you a son and daughter when the world called you something different. You are here today because of mercy. And yet a lot of us are like Jonah, where we want to receive it, but we don't want to give it back. We want understanding for our situations, but we don't show understanding for other people. When I cut you off in traffic because I'm running late to my kid's recital, I hope that you understand that this was for an emergency. But let somebody cut me off in traffic and I'm ready to yell and scream and use my hands in an ungodly way because you cut me off. Where is the understanding and compassion? Where is it? You know what? Maybe that person has a loved one that's in the hospital and they're desperately trying to reach them. Lord, please bless that person. I don't know why they're speeding. I don't know what's going on, but Lord, touch them. No, we don't pray. We rage. We don't offer mercy and compassion. We offer insults. I want God to be merciful upon me. I want God to understand that I'm a human being and I make mistakes and I'm fragile and I'm frail. It says in the Bible that God remembers what we forget and he forgets what we remembers. He remembers that we are made from nothing more than dust. And he forgets our sins and our past mistakes. And yet we as human beings, we don't show mercy and grace to other people. You harmed me and you did me wrong. I'm not going to forget it. I'm going to hold on to it. The other day, a couple of days ago, Danielle asked me a question. Actually, it was Friday. We were coming back from the beach. We went to Cocoa Beach. So we had like a 2.5-hour drive. So we're there and we're talking. And Danielle asked me this question. Some questions reveal what's really in your heart and areas of opportunity. And I believe that God gives us spouses for a reason. Sometimes we think that they're there just to get on our last nerves, but sometimes they agitate us in the right direction. And they reveal to us blind spots and areas in our life that we need God's help and grace on. And if we allow our spouse to speak into our life, we become better for it. So my wife asked me a question. And we like to play this game. What if we won the lottery? What if we ended up winning the Mega Millions for whatever it was that day or that time? And so she asked me, she said, let's play the game. I'm like, okay. She said, if we won the Mega Millions, what petty thing would you spend money on? So what do you mean? She's like, would you use it to be petty towards other people? I was like, I don't know. That's kind of a crazy question. And then I was like, yeah. I was like, this person right here, I would do X, Y, and Z. This person right here, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to them. This person right here, I would absolutely do this. And she's like looking at me, and I was like, what? I'm like, you asked a question, and she's like, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of things. Do you think about that? And I was like, no, I don't really think about that. I don't think I think about that. And I was like, maybe I do think about that. Maybe I need to let more things go in my life. And I was like, okay, God, area of opportunity. I need to show more mercy to people. God's also like, you're preaching about Jonah, grace and mercy. And I was like, ooh, that hurt. Because I don't always show understanding and compassion and grace towards other people, but I want you to show it towards me. We all want to receive, but we don't all want to give it back. What if we showed understanding to people that maybe they don't deserve it, but we do it anyway? What if the person that hurt us in ways that we can't understand and know they don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm not forgiving you for you because you deserve it. I'm forgiving you for me because if I don't forgive, God can't forgive me, and I refuse to harbor poison in my heart towards you. But also, if God forgave me, who am I to harbor anger and hatred and unforgiveness towards you? Praise team, come on up here. Closing out. Jonah chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he became angry. So he prayed to the Lord and said, Lord, was not this what I said when I was still in my country? Therefore I fled previously to Tarshish, for I know that you are gracious and a merciful God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, one who relents from doing harm. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. And the Lord said, is it right for you to be angry? Let's break it down in modern day terms. Jonah was real mad that God showed mercy and grace toward the Ninevites because deep down on the inside, he was hoping that God would destroy them. Lord, I didn't want to go, not because I was afraid, not because I was worried about the Ninevites. I didn't want to go because I was hoping you would destroy them. Can you imagine hating a people so much that you would run away from the assignment God gave you because you were hoping destruction would fall upon them? Jonah was so upset that God forgave the Ninevites. It said that he said, it is better for me to die than to live. If you're going to show them grace and mercy, kill me because they don't deserve it. Imagine hating someone because they don't look like you, they don't talk like you, they don't walk like you. They're not from your country. And so you don't believe that God's grace and mercy extends to them because they're not like you. I would rather die than see the Ninevites forgiven. Imagine this man of God having a conversation with God. I would rather you kill me than save them. Truly, the villain of the story. Now here's where it comes full circle. And I want you guys to catch this right here. I'm going to come down to you. I want you to pay attention to what happened. I don't want you to miss I don't want you to miss this detail. This is so important about why you never know the assignment that God has for you. Why you show grace and mercy and love, because you never know what someone is going through. You don't know the situation. You don't know who they can become. Ananias was called to go to a man by the name of Saul of Tarsus. And God said, Ananias, go pray for him and give him his eyesight back. God, do you know who Saul is? Yes, but he is useful to me. Go. And what if Ananias would never have went? Half the Bible would be missing, because Saul would become Paul and go on to write almost half of the New Testament and preach the gospel and take it further than anyone else could. Not without Instagram, no Facebook, no telephone, nothing. Just letters and his own 2 feet. But somebody saw beyond who he was to who he could become. Jonah had the opportunity to preach to the city of Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire. The king told the people to fast and pray. He put everyone in sackcloth and ashes, and he said, we are going to turn to God. Had Jonah stayed and preached the gospel, had he stayed and discipled the people of Nineveh, had he raised up prophets to go forth and continue preaching the gospel, who knows what would have happened? But instead, he sat on a hill and prayed to die because he didn't want to go back and see those people saved. Here's the part I don't want you to miss. A few decades later, 30 to 40 years later, a king would arise in Nineveh who did not honor God like the previous king had done. There was no discipleship. There was no one preaching. There was no one teaching. There was no one leading them. And what happens several decades later? The Assyrian army rises up. They go into Israel and they capture them. They don't just capture the Israelites. The Assyrians were barbaric. They go into Israel. They disperse them. They take the 10 tribes and they send them out to other places. They intermingle them with other races to erase their bloodline. When Jesus shows up onto the scene, he tells the apostles, he said, I need you to go preach the gospel to the lost tribes of the house of Israel. How did they get lost? The Assyrian army came in and invaded them and dispersed them and abused them and scattered them. But what would have happened if Jonah stayed and kept preaching in Nineveh? He left, and when he left, evil came back. And when evil came back, it cost his country everything. The Israelites lost everything. Why? Because the Assyrians went back to doing evil. Jonah's assignment wasn't just go to Nineveh. It was reform the country. Take back this country. This could be a great ally to Israel, but because you dislike this people so much, they will now come into your country, strip you of everything, take you guys as captives, and you will have nothing. He had a great assignment before him, but he couldn't see past the people he was going to. You might think I'm just on this job and that's just a coworker. You have no idea the assignment that God has called you to. They might just be your neighbor from the physical, but you have no idea the potential that God has put inside of them. And if you will just take a little time and invite them to church and ask if you can pray for them, you don't know what they could become. We dismiss people too soon. We look at who they are right now. We write them off. We judge books by their covers. And God's saying, I have a plan for them. but you missed it.